All right, so I have taken the pins out and I have taken the cap off of the wig head. So we're going to mark the points or the places where we're going to sew. So we have two darts that sit in the back. So these are the two that were just kind of raggedly hand sewn so we can make sure that it's down. And then we also have this that needs to be kind of given an idea or drawn out so that we can be able to sew on it. So I'm just going to take, I'm more focused on my, I'm more focused on the darts being a perfect, you know, seam. So there's a point and then there's an end. So there's two dart legs. When you close them together, you have your point and you have your end. So we're just going to make sure that it's at the point and make sure that it's at the end from where we knotted it on the wig head. And I'm just going to take some chalk, like a marking chalk or tailor's chalk, and I'm going to draw a line there. That's there, and I'm going to use the straight edge once again. And actually, when you put it through the sewing machine, doesn't matter which side you do it, but if you prefer, you know, to have the excess, the outside on the left side and the less amount of fabric on the inside of the sewing machine to make it easier for you to see, then you just want to mark this side. So let's do this. And there's your line there. I'm going to do the same thing for the other dart. Again, try to keep most of the fabric over to my left side, and then my right side is where I'm going to be putting it in the sewing machine that way. So I'm going to make sure that it's at the point and it's at the end. And I'm just going to draw a line best way I can with my tailor's chalk. Tailor's chalk got from Amazon, so it's good for marking. And there's my line there to help me to be able to see where I need to sew on from. From here, because there is seam allowance, so what I mean seam allowance, like I've cut enough as even as I possibly could around the top edge of this. So I am going to just use that as my seam allowance guide. So I'm going to put it in the sewing machine as a reference to keep it the same all the way around, even trying to keep it along the actual stitch lines, hand stitch lines that I have, but I'm going to show you that in just a second. Alright, so at the sewing machine, and it's obvious that you need to know you need to use a straight stitch for this. You have a choice of using a clear thread. So this is like a clear coat thread that you can find at a fabric store. I provide these in the hands-on courses, so keep that in mind. And then there are the threads that you can use that actually somewhat matches the cap. So if you're one of those people who like for your threads to be somewhat close to the same color, if not exactly the same color as the lace that you're using, you can do that. For the sake of instruction, I'm going to use this color, but I would say professional wise, you want to use clear thread. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and get started. You want to make sure you have a pair of scissors or nippers near you so that you can cut thread. Most sewing machines have this like little cut where you can actually cut the thread from the back of your machine. So depending on your sewing machine, I'm going to start with the top part of the cap, meaning the part that goes from ear to ear, because this is a lace frontal lace wig cap. So I'm going to put it into the sewing machine, and I'm going to use this as a guide reference of where I want to place it. And it looks like it's about 1.5 inches that I am going to be doing this. So I'm going to put my needle down and put my presser foot down. So as you can see, like this is where it is on my sewing machine. You have, most sewing machines have guides. If not, you can use some tape as a reference to for guiding. That's something we learned in fashion sewing, but because I can see kind of clearly what my sewing thread gives me, how much of a seam allowance, so I'm going to make sure that I follow that exact line as I sew all the way through. All right, now so I'm going to go ahead and sew the darts now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the dart point all the way to the closed dart legs. What I'm going to do is make sure that the line, blue line that I just marked, is lined with my needle and where my presser foot is. So I'm going to make sure that it's lined up. I'm going to put my needle down, not at the very dart tip, but just a little bit past it, and put my presser foot down. So as you can see, the needle is right on the line, or right where it should be on the line of the fabric or that we just drawn. So this is the line that we've just drawn. So you see that that needle is right there, and you want to make sure that it's not on the dart leg or the point, right at the point. You want it a little bit past it so that you can back stitch and then continue to sew forward stitch, and once you get to the end, you'll back stitch from there. So here I'm going to go forward a little bit, and then I'm going to back stitch all the way to the dart point if I can, and then I'm going to continue to sew forward. Make sure it's on that line. Just continue on until you're done. Back stitch. You should be done. Now I missed this point, so I'm going to go ahead and mention it, but you do want to back stitch at the area that you actually had the knotting at. So remember to do that, but I'm going to forward stitch and back stitch really quickly, and then back stitch. And then I'm going to show you how you want to take care of that on the other dart, how you actually want to do that. So again, I'm going to go to the other dart, and then again, aligning the mark or the marking we created a little bit ahead of the dart point. We're going to go forward just a little bit. And then we're going to go all the way back, control it, all the way back to the point, and then you're going to go all the way to the end. Take your time with your sewing machine. Keep in mind where your knotting is. If for any reason that you feel you need to remember to do that, here is a good tip. Just put a pin there and just continue sewing. When you get to that point, go past it a little bit and then back stitch all the way back. And then from that point, you're going to continue sewing all the way to the end. And you don't have to back stitch at this point, just pull it out, because you're actually going to end up cutting that anyway when we put it on the wig head. So this cap is pretty much done. So let's zoom out a little bit. So this cap is done. So what I'm going to do is make sure any excess threads that I have is cut away, and my basting stitch that I did by hand is taken out as well. So that's what I'm going to do. Now anywhere you have basting stitch, which means that's a basting stitch that you did by hand on the wig head, you want to use a seam ripper. So this is a seam ripper. There are seam rippers in different sizes, and there are some that are blades, but this allows you to find those threads, and they're usually a little bit larger because they're messier and you hand done them, and you can actually try to pull those threads completely out so that you can have a completely finished professionally clean, finished seams in your cap. All right, so the last thing I like to do for the professionalism of the cap is I like to turn in the darts and as well as the top seam allowance and top stitch over it. So this is what I mean where I'm going to top stitch over it. So I'm going to make sure that my darts, because this is the inside of it as of right now, this is the inside of the cap. So I'm going to turn my darts inward. So that means I'm going to lay the triangle piece towards the inside of the nape or towards the inside of the head, away from the ears. So that's what I'm going to do, is pin that one over, and I'm just going to pin it down for now, and then I'm going to pin the other so that they're both facing or going towards each other. For the lace part, because the top part is actually ventilated or used to ventilate, so we're going to make sure that the extra seam allowance doesn't go towards the ventilating lace, it goes towards the back. So I'm going to take this off so that I can get around my sewing machine pretty easy. And I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. So that's number 4 on this machine, a true zigzag stitch. And I think I'm going to put the lace this way and then this, because it curves and I needed to curve around the machine. I'm going to have the cap towards the back or towards my left side, and the lacing that's going to be for ventilating towards the inside of the machine. So I'm going to make sure that this seam allowance is pushed over into it, and I'm going to align the seam to the edge of the presser foot. I'm going to put my needle down, and then I'm going to drop my presser foot. So as you can see here, the presser foot is, the seam is aligned to the edge of the presser foot, and I'm just going to do a top stitch right next to it, and then I'm going to cut the excess seam allowance off. So first I'm going to sew it down so that it sits towards the inside of the cap, towards the back of the nape of the cap, and not onto the lace that's ventilating or for ventilating. All right, so I start with top stitching just that top piece, adding the frontal to the rest of the cap, and I'm actually using somewhat of a decorative stitch. So I start with that first, and then I move on to each dart, making sure that the fabric fold is towards the inside of the cap or towards the center of the cap and not towards the ear tabs, if that makes any sense. So again, I'm using a decorative zigzag stitch for that as well, and then I just cut any excess seam allowance in this sense right at that zigzag stitch so that it's clean and finished. And then after cutting all of the excess off, I just make sure that all of the excess threads have been cut off and we're done. All right, so this cap is done. So you have your lace frontal, which is ventilated you can ventilate it in the front, and you have the back of your cap that has its darts that fits to your person or your wig head, which should fit to the person based on the size of the wig head that you're using. You can ventilate back here, or you can sew tracks back here as well, track here. So full lace wig caps nowadays are not just for ventilating the whole thing to make a full lace ventilated cap, which is hand tied, and that's in the previous courses, but this is also can be done to ventilate the front and then sew the back. So you guys get my drift. But this has been done correctly. It's sewn down so that you can be able to ventilate on top of it. The darts give it its fit in the back. So that's done. So the last thing that needs to be done to this cap is adding the edges, the elastic, so that this could actually lay a little bit better and flat, and then you would be done.